Support this podcast at patreon.com/Kris Karl Photography Podcast. At what age did you first begin in photography?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been thinking about it a little bit because of course, I touch the camera every now and then. I think most of us did when they were younger. Maybe you use your parents' camera, you had your own, but to take it really seriously, that's and really growing into what I do now. That's pretty much 5.5, 6 years ago when I switched from doing videography, which was really one of my main outputs back then, into still photography. And it was a bit by coincidence, actually, because my video camera broke, and it was broken for a while already. And I started to get annoyed by the fact that I couldn't really do anything anymore. And I really felt like going back into working with still photography as well, because I used a still photo camera for stills before, of course. I went to art school and I graduated in 2010. And there I used the camera every now and then just to document stuff that I did. So I had an okay camera, but I just never really used it with the intention to make a photograph as the end result. It was more like for registration kind of purposes. So so I did a lot of videos and used the camera that way. Then that video camera broke and I had to replace it. So after doing some research, I said, okay, you know what? Because I really want to do still photography as well, I'm going to buy a DSLR so I can do both with the same machine. And I ended up mainly taking photographs. And that's it's been my main medium ever since. Pretty much. I mean, I still like to switch it up and do other stuff as well. It's not so I never say I'm a photographer. I always say, okay, I'm a visual artist, and at the moment I mainly work with photography. So it's a bit of there's a small difference there, I think. So I think it's important to emphasize that every now and then, because I use it as a tool to make the imagery that I make, even though they're straightforward photographs. There's no playing around with them afterwards. It's just the photograph is the final outcome. But I am not a photographer per se, so there's a difference there.
Okay, that's incredible. A lot of people seem to go from photo to video, and you've gone the other way around, which is really interesting. Who were your first photographic influences?
Well, very first one is growing up, we didn't really have any art in the house. It's not like my parents were completely uninterested in the arts, but we didn't go to museums. I didn't grow up in a big city with museums or galleries around, so it wasn't a big part of my life. But we did have a photo book from a Dutch street photographer, Ed van der Elsken. And it's called Hallo, which is Dutch word for hello. Pretty obvious. It's a Dutch photo book also. I mean, it's what's really nice in the back of the book. He has all the spreads really small with some comments below it. That's all in Dutch, but it's really nice. You can read really his thought process or just about what he thinks of the photographs. And they're just each page of the book, so you have a left page and a right page, they always have some kind of interaction, like similar subjects but in completely different parts of the world, and he's playing with that a little bit. And it's just registrations of things that he bumped into while doing his travels. He traveled quite a bit, and he made this book out of it. And it's completely full of quite funny stuff often. And as a kid, not knowing much about the world, it was already interesting to look through it just from that perspective. I mean, there's photos of punkers in there and of Hells Angels, but also a lot of Asian imagery. So it's like it's opening up a whole new world. So I think that's one of the reasons I was attracted to it already. But I wasn't really allowed to look through the book because there's some nudity in there, even some sex happening. So I wasn't really allowed to look through it. But of course, I knew that the book was there and I found it interesting. So every time I had a possibility to grab it, I would take it out of the cupboard and just start going through it. So that's been a very early influence on what I've always found interesting. And he was a street photographer. Most of his more famous work is all black and white. Actually, this book is pretty much every photograph is in color. But his black and white work is quite. That's what he's more known for. He also made films, by the way. Even though I make completely different kinds of photographs than he does, but I still think there is kind of a similarity in the sense that he wasn't a studio photographer. So he was really going out there and just hoping to find, or believing he would find something interesting to take photos of. And that's something that's also part of my process. So I think it's somehow really influenced me, and I still really like the book. I'm looking at it now. I have it in my hands as we speak, and it's the original one that my parents had in their house. They gave it to me, so it's really nice to have it now. And of course, after that, once I went to art school, before that, I already had developed an interest in the arts. But when I went to art school, then you really start to dive in deeper, and you find other artists that are maybe closer to what I'm doing now. But back then, this was it. And then, it's still a treasure to have this book. And so Ed van der Elsken, it's really worth looking him up. He's an interesting Dutch artist. So.
You described yourself as a visual artist. You obviously have the possibility of an incredible amount of mediums from which you can present your work, or mediums through which you can work. Why did you choose photography specifically as a medium?
Yeah, so in a way, it came to me unexpected, because I opened myself up to it with purchasing a DSLR, which I meant to start using for videos, but then started to do photography with more and more. So in that sense, I adapted to it. It was just kind of coincidental, but of course, once you start rolling into it, you become more aware of what you're actually doing. So I think if I look back at it now, and also the reason I still do photography so much and I really enjoy it a lot, is that because it gives me a possibility to show the world in a different way, even though it is just the way I register it with this machine, this tool. So I can, I've really arrived at a quite abstract way of photographing, but I'm not changing anything to the world around me to achieve such a photograph. It's really my way of looking at it. Mm-hmm. And I really like that you can capture something. So, I mean, you can also do that by drawing it or painting it, but I really like the fact that just because you have a lens and some light, something that can capture what's coming through that lens, that's a way to show your way of viewing the world around you. That's something that I find super interesting. And of course, you can also do that with video, which is why I did video for a while, I think. But the nice thing about stills is that there is less context. And I mean, you immediately pull it out of its original context and it becomes something by itself. And of course, you can still give people the possibility to understand what kind of context it came from, but it becomes something else. And yeah, I really like this way of translating reality into something else. And what that something else is still, I mean, that sounds very broad and open and maybe vague. But that's so I can, for a really short, brief moment, I can shape reality just by taking a photograph. And I think that's what attracts me to photography so much. Yeah.
I mean, you've mentioned sort of taking things out of context and seeing the abstract. One thing I cannot even begin to comprehend is how you train your eye to locate abstract compositions. So how did you train your eye to find them?
that's also something that I think I slowly grew into. So when I started out with photographing, I already had that street approach, which I also did with my videos. So walking around in search of, with the belief that I would find some interesting scenes to capture. But I quickly noticed that the difference between the videos that I took, which were often of people doing things which out of their context became interesting, I found it really hard to do a similar thing with my photographs. At least the way I approached my photography in the beginning was really trying to capture people doing stuff in an interesting setting. So without really knowing that was street photography, I was doing street photography, or at least attempting. But I quickly noticed that photographing people just very directly, it doesn't. I don't know. I can't. It doesn't feel good to me. I feel awkward doing it, and so I try to work around it and do it differently. So in a quite literal way sometimes, by using reflections, for example. So to still have people in my images, but not in a very direct way, and also not photographing them without with them immediately seeing me taking their photographs. So I was coming up with new ways of at least for me, to photograph people, and at the same time also have an interesting composition. And then, of course, when you use reflections, you immediately see that there's an extra layer added to your photographs. So some extra effects are happening that don't happen when you're just straightforward photographing someone. And I found that very interesting. So slowly I started to focus more on those effects. So I started to look for shapes and lines and colors and textures, and then in the beginning also still like if you use the hunter fisher mentality for street photography, like a fisher waiting for someone to walk into that nicely composed frame. But it didn't take too long until I started to leave the people out. I liked it much better when there was just an interesting composition, and that is something that I took further and further. And that's really what I'm still doing, is just trying to strip everything down, try to look at reality without the meaning of the individual objects that you see attached to it. So I really try to reduce the reality that I walk in to shapes and lines and colors and textures, and then find interesting compositions within these elements. So I'm really trying to discard what it actually means. Like a tree is not a tree anymore, but it can be just a straight vertical line. Those kinds of ways of looking at it is what I attempt. And I'm not only doing that when I'm taking photographs, but when I'm walking around, I also do it. And that sometimes can be frustrating, but you can find something very interesting and you can't capture it. Or I could with my phone, but a phone is something else than the camera that I regularly use. I mean, I think it's similar when someone who's a painter could also make a quick sketch with a pen that he has in his pocket and on a piece of paper, but it's not going to be the same as when he would have his brushes and a proper canvas and everything. So you can still make a note for yourself with your phone maybe. But if I have the proper tools with me, I can really do what I want to do. So it can be frustrating sometimes not to have the tools around. On the other hand, you're still training yourself, and sometimes it's good to just let things happen, and not everything has to be captured, I think. So I don't know. I hope that's clarifying it a little bit how I do this.
Oh, definitely. I mean, one thing that when I look at your work that I think I have an idea, but I'd love to hear the actual truth on, because I could probably make my own mind up and be completely wrong. Mm-hmm. But when you're out photographing, when you're out looking for a new piece of work, is it the light, color, or texture that's the most important element that you're searching for?
The light. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It wasn't in the beginning, I think. In the beginning, but also because when I started this, I didn't really know what the elements were even. So I really have to, and I still do that. I look back at what I've done. So what's in my catalog? What a year ago, 2 years ago, and what stands out and why, and then try to reverse engineer what I've done. And of course, you cannot always completely do that, but so yeah, I think if I look at what I've been interested in the past, what is it, 2 years, 3 years now, then light is definitely the most important ingredient. And it can be annoying because light changes so fast all the time. So sometimes even when you see something, and it also depends on what kind of light you're working with, but especially, well, I'm in the Netherlands now. I tend to travel quite a bit with a camper van. So I go to the south of Europe often, like Spain, Portugal, sometimes Italy. And there's more sunny days. So you have less cloudy days without having the light change all the time. But if I'm here in the Netherlands, it's quite cloudy also today. So the light changes all the time. So sometimes you find something, and once you're ready to take your photograph, the light changes, and maybe 10 minutes later, the light will be back, but it's not going to be the same anymore. So you have to adjust. Yeah. And in my case, it often also means, okay, this is not happening. So I'm just walking on. I'm just going. I try to be more patient sometimes, and I've had to be more patient recently because, we were traveling when the whole Corona crisis started, and we decided, okay, we have to go back to the Netherlands, and so we had to stay inside all of a sudden again. And I'm so used to walking around with a camera and just, in a way, chasing the light, just going after it, and really walking around without an actual plan in my head, and just taking new photographs, finding situations I can take photos of. And all of a sudden I had to stick to one location. And that's something I'm not used to. I wasn't used to. I'm a bit more used to now. And I've really started to look different at light, also because I knew every day the light is going to return pretty much similar the next day and the same time, even though that changes over the months as well, of course. But so I started to understand light in that sense more. I had the possibility to go back to the same location on a daily basis and do things with situations that were created by the light at that moment of the day. So that was interesting, actually. That's something I've never really did before. Usually when I travel, I'm just walking around in a city for 1 or 2 days, and then, depending on what's happening, but most of the time I just move on to the next. And it's not big cities. Often it's smaller towns. I'm not going for of course, a big city can be very nice and interesting, and you're a bit more anonymous, which can be nice if you're walking around with a camera with a big lens and making weird movements to capture interesting compositions. But I go to a lot of smaller towns too. So it's not, I don't have to need to go to big cities. It's more, to just end up somewhere where there's the right conditions of what I'm interested in at that moment. And I can only know what I'm interested in by seeing it and by looking back at what I've been photographing over the past weeks, months, years. I am better at noticing it when I'm at the place where I am at that moment. So yeah, that's a really long answer, but I try to what I try to say is that the light is really absolutely the most important. But yeah, it doesn't function without the other two elements. You said color and texture, right? I mean, I really do. Even though what often happens is photographs turn out almost black and white, but depending on how the light is, even though it was, I mean, I never take black and white photographs, but sometimes they look almost monochrome just because of how the light works at that moment. And if the textured background elements aren't very colorful either, then color becomes less important. So maybe color is even on the bottom of the list of those three.
Okay.
Yeah, even though I like it when it's very colorful, but that just doesn't always work that way. Even though your eyes can see the color, but the way you take the photograph, sometimes that really messes with how the colors come out. So.
Well, I think you bring up an excellent point in the sense that, like, you've now been restricted in terms of your movement. And sometimes I actually think the restrictions can help you grow quite a bit as a photographer, because you have to kind of work out something within a very small boundary. Sometimes having limitless options actually makes it quite hard to focus yourself as an artist. One thing I do want to get your opinion on is what separates a great abstract image from just a good abstract image?
Yeah, that's a good one. What for me, and of course, there's not just one answer to this question, even for me, but I think one of the things that I find really interesting about abstract photography, the way I do it, and also when I see other people's abstract photographs of reality, of course, I mean, you can also work in the studio and set up something and it becomes abstract just because it's not figurative to begin with, what you're photographing. But what I really like is that it's not the photograph of the reality that you take, and when it becomes abstract, that it's not just a photograph that is at first glance not very recognizable registration of the reality that we're in, but it also transforms it, that it becomes something else, that it can like what I really like about a lot of the stuff that I've been photographing lately is how your perception works when it comes to foreground and background. So if you have this, I don't know if you know what I mean with a Necker cube. It's like this line drawing of a cube where you cannot tell what is the foreground or what is the background. I love it when that happens. I really like that. And I like how you can play with perception with images, and especially if it's possible with photography. So by leaving out certain parts of the situation, just by the way you're framing your composition, or by letting something in, I really like that. So for me, that's what makes a abstract photograph more interesting, is when something like that, that's really an added layer, when it really it demands you as a viewer to rethink about what you're looking at. So it's not just a bunch of colors in a nice composition, even though that can also absolutely also be a very interesting and good abstract photograph. But yeah, for me, when there's just that extra layer, I really like that, because then it doesn't just involve the viewing experience, but it also starts to play with how your brain perceives reality, and I think that's an interesting thing that art can do anyway. Any art is to shake your foundation a little bit and start to question your very fundamental beliefs, or not even beliefs. They're just the things that you accept as this is how the world functions. And if all of a sudden that starts to shake a little bit, I like that. I mean, it doesn't always have to work that way, but yeah, that's for me something that I aim for to have in my photographs.
Well, it definitely goes into quite a philosophical alleyway, because it turns into, you could have small interpretations of the same scene and all of them would be telling the truth, but would all contradict each other, in the sense that they would play against each other. One person could photograph a scene and focus really tightly on one element, and you could photograph it and focus on a different element. And they're both true representations of what's there, but they also don't mix together, which is kind of a really fascinating part of abstract photography, I think. If you don't mind me asking, what emotional reaction do you want to your audience to experience? What's the emotional reaction that you're looking for from people that experience your work?
Well, what I've always liked when it happens is, and I think it's also already a little bit in my previous answer, is when people have to reconsider what they are seeing. And
right.
What I've done a couple of times, and it also brings back our little conversation about restrictions a bit. I've done a few projects where I gave myself a 1 week in a 1 kilometer or a 1 mile radius, depending on the project, And that's where I had to photograph for that amount of time. And that was for me to focus on something new. To try, I mean, if you are photographing in the same area for such a short amount of time, or which is actually quite long, if it's a whole week, you start to approach it differently, and you have to push yourself to get to interesting photo. Because what I did was I had an exhibition afterwards. So after that week, I immediately would exhibit the results. So I had to come up with some good photographs and something, and especially photographs that I was happy with, that, and also happy to share with the rest of the world. So I had to really push myself to get something new out of the situation that after 5 days, for example, you already know pretty much the whole area where you've been photographing. So if you really push yourself. But what was really nice about these projects was that the people that would visit the exhibition afterwards were often also people that are from the same area. So yeah, during this 1 week photographing, I would really push myself to find still interesting and new things in the same situation, and because I was showing the results afterwards, I would of course also invite people that I met along the way, so people from the area where I was photographing, and I would keep track of where I took each photograph. So I put the street name under the printed photographs that were hanging in the exhibition. And then you had the whole conversations with people that really didn't understand how that could be in the street that they are living in. They never saw it that way. And I think that's something that's very interesting, where that can happen when you can. Well, also for me as a maker, I can already surprise myself sometimes that with the obvious can become something quite spectacular. And I think that's a very interesting thing if that can happen. And I like it when that also comes through to the viewer. So when they have like just a little change in the way they see their reality, or know that you can see reality in a different way. And this is on a quite physical level, of course. I mean, you can also have a very emotional change of how you see your daily surroundings. And of course, that's not going to happen with my photography, but maybe it does give people well, maybe they start to think about their daily surroundings in a different way, and maybe they start to then understand also, like, hey, I can actually change how I perceive just my daily life differently just by changing my perspective. And I think I really hope, of course, that something like that comes true. And I think most of the time it doesn't. And I'm already happy if someone is just interested in seeing how I photographed.
Well, if you don't mind me jumping in, really quickly, you like to surprise yourself, you said sometimes. How much planning are you doing before you head out? I suppose, are you going out with a pre-visualized idea? Do you scout before you go out and shoot? Or is it the case that you go out and just let, what you see talk to you?
Yeah, my planning really involves making sure my battery is full and my camera is clean, the lens is clean, and that's pretty much it. Just I bring some food and some water, and that's it. It's very open. That's part of what I really like about it. So the process is very important, actually. I really think the outcome is also very important, because of course that's what I'm going for in the end, to have some interesting photographs. But finding them, that's where the fun is. I think that even though there's a lot of fun afterwards, but just walking around and then knowing, because that's also a thing. By now I know there will be something that is going to be interesting, and I don't know what it's going to be, what it's going to look like, if it's going to be very close up or if it's a quite wide shot. I don't know these kinds of things, but that also involves me having to look for it and having to keep my eyes open, like literally, and my mind open also, just to different things. And so I'm also letting in other interests. Sometimes I come back with, so not all the photographs I take are really super abstract. Sometimes there's a few things that just stand out that I find interesting. I have a bunch of photographs at the moment just waiting for a project where I can use them. And I know there's not enough yet. At least I always want more than 20 photographs of something that I find interesting, that are good enough to show together, and also to be able to, like, if I only have 3, I find it really hard to. I want to make sure that I've got a grasp on this new interest before I show it. So it's not just a lucky shot. It's not a coincidence, but it's really very deliberate and intentional that I've done this. So, well, I've got a bunch of photographs lying now, or not lying, it's just there are still bits on my hard drive, but they're waiting for me to start using them for some kind of project. I don't know what it's going to be. So I also stay open for other things. And these are not super abstract photographs. They're quite figurative, but of these typical things that you sometimes find, how people solved things in their daily surroundings, or just how things grew over time, how plants sometimes take over man-made objects. But that's still, hearing myself saying it, it's still too vague. So that's not there yet. But I keep myself open to these new things. So the discovery can also be something new sometimes. And maybe in a year or maybe in 2 years, this will be something that I can really say, okay, this is it. This is what it's about. I can write a little text about it, and it's going to be a project of its own. But when I go out, my main focus is on what I've been working with for the past months. And that slowly changes, of course. If I look back at what I've been doing, and I can look back quite easily, because I do a quarterly magazine. And that's usually with quite recent photographs. So I can quite easily see how my process is going in that sense. So when I walk around, I really try to find something, and I know there's going to be something that I find interesting, and that it's going to be a good photograph, even if it's never going to be seen by anyone else but me, but just because it's going to be part of the process that I want to be in. And I'm not sure where the end of that process is. I'm not sure if I want there to be an end goal. I just know that I want to be better at finding these situations where I can take these photographs that I do and understand even better how I do it. Because that's a weird thing. You can do it, but you don't know how you do it yet. I know by now pretty much how I do it, but there's still a lot of things that I have to understand about how I do it.
That's something I've seen with people that teach when they do something for a living and then they teach it. They sort of, because they start to talk about it, they start to say it out loud, and they start to think about it from an external point of view. They start to actually learn about what they were thinking when they were doing something, because at the time they weren't monitoring themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And somehow you do already have the skills, or at least the possibility to do it. Yeah. But you haven't got a grasp on it. Like, I don't know. I think that's how everything in life works, right? I mean, if you learn how to walk, you don't really know how to walk or what it means to walk, but your body can do it. And then after a while, I mean, then you can become a super athlete if you have the right genes and the right possibilities to train it. And you can jump 2 meter high or whatever, like the weird stuff that you would never think possible. But just because you focus on it and you start to understand what you're doing, how it works. So that's maybe what I try to do on a visual level with, and right now it's with photography, but I can totally see that change again. But it could also be that it just, I think I will always be taking photographs, but I can totally see myself focusing on a different medium at some point again. It's already happening a little bit now that I have been taking photographs inside for a quite long time. I'm not bored with it. It's just not giving me something new at the moment. So I've picked up on an older love of mine, so to say, which is collage, but then with the way of well, with the way I'm looking at the world to take the photographs that I make now is also the way I'm trying to do collages at the moment. So it's really about shapes and color and texture again. But now I'm creating with my hands instead of registering with a camera. So there's definitely an overlap there. And I think this is nothing yet, these collages. But again, there, you just have to keep doing it. So you slowly become better at it and start understanding why you do, what you like about it, and how to get to the result that you would like to get to. So, yeah, that's why I like walking around without a plan when I take photographs. Just going and knowing I will bump into something that will surprise me. And sometimes it's a surprise just because I'm surprised that, wow, this is possible, just to see how light interacts with the various elements that are in front of me and around me, of course. But sometimes it's also surprising myself with the fact that I can capture things in a certain way. The first time I took what in my eyes was one of my first successful abstract-ish photographs was by using a reflection. But there were such strong shapes with very defined colors, so it was very well organized, just because it was already like that around me. But there were so many layers coming together, and there was a nice dusty layer on the glass, so it became a bit painterly, and all these things happened. So that was a surprise, and the fact that I could do that in the camera just by taking a photograph, and of course by knowing how to use the camera to photograph it right. I surprised myself on that level. So it's also different kinds of surprises, and sometimes the surprise is not always as big. It cannot always be a big party, of course. But
you just mentioned sort of that painterly quality to the work. Something I have seen a few people comment on your work and a couple of other abstract artists I follow is that the photography looks like a painting. Yeah. Or it gets mistaken for a painting. If your work got mistaken for painting, would that frustrate you, or do you see that as a compliment?
Oh, I like that. I like it. I play with it a little bit. I'm not adding anything to the photographs to get to that point, or I'm not doing anything on that level. But when I print my photographs, I really prefer to have them printed on quite textured matte paper. So when they are framed and hanging on the wall, people often think they are paintings just because they don't look like a photograph. People tend to think that a photograph has to be on glossy paper for some reason. Right. I really don't like that. Well, at least with the photography I'm doing now, it just doesn't work. It's such a contrast with the content of the photograph. So the material really, for me, it has to flow into the two have to mix, so to say. And that really works well if I use this nice matte paper. Then it really starts to look like a painting. And especially if you have an audience on a fair or on I do this biannual event in the town where I grew up, where a lot of people also come just because they know people that are taking part in this. Like it's not a super small town, but it's not very big either. So most people know a lot of the people that take part in this local event. So they come mainly because they know some of the people, not so much because they are interested in arts per se. So when they see my work, they often say, "Hey, those are interesting paintings," or that's literally what they say, what they come up with, or what kind of paint is this made with. And I like that also because it's a starting point for a conversation. And then, because it's really nice if a photograph can just sit or stand or hang by itself, and just people can be one-on-one with it, and that's it. But I also really like it when there's a possibility to have a interaction. I mean, that even happens on social media, of course. Although a lot of interaction is very like it's only a few sentences, or it's very superficial, which can also be nice, I think. But when you have an actual conversation with someone, you can really, sometimes you can change people's mind just a little bit. I mean, just about their meaning about that piece of art that they're looking at. And of course, I'm not talking about my own work, but can also be other people's art that you have a conversation about when you're looking at it together. And I think that's nice. So no, I don't mind when people mistake. Yeah, it's a mistake in a very literal sense, but I think it's just another take. It's just a different take on what they see. It's not so much a mistake, even though that's the word you would use to describe what's happening. But it's nice when that happens, because it gives you an opportunity to take someone by the hand and walk them through what they're looking at. And I think it's again, I think that's one of the nice things about art, that they can change your way of looking at how the world around us is made. And for me, that's again on a very visual level. But I think a lot of art also can really help people see just how we've organized the world around us in a different way, and maybe question it, and maybe change a little bit about their own behavior, or try to change how we interact with each other. And I think that's nice about it. So yeah, these mistakes are the good ones. Those are the nice kinds of mistakes. They're fine. And of course, I'm not on thin ice with the very controversial stuff. Like, I'm never gonna. Nobody's gonna call my work racist or xenophobic, because that's just people. It would be interesting if someone did that, but I would be surprised if that happened. So in my sense, it's not very dangerous if people mistake my work. If you do have these controversial elements in your work, any artist who does that also does that very deliberately, I think, to evoke reaction and have a possibility to have a conversation. So I think it's always a good thing when the viewer has a different idea about what they're looking at than the maker had, and when there can be a conversation, that's a good thing.
I mean, you started off by mentioning printing, and with the sort of proliferation of the internet, do you think that the photographic world has lost its appreciation for the art of printing?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's of course gotten different, because it's so much easier to share photographs on a screen. It's cheaper, but on the other hand, of course, there's less print these days. It's with every print medium, I think, at the moment, like books, newspapers, without the arts included also. I mean, anything printed has become smaller or not less important in that sense. But I think there's still a big appreciation for printed photography, although it's different, especially on a on a family level. I think there's definitely less, because it's just people don't print a lot of the photographs anymore, which is also okay in a way, I think, because you don't. How often did you really look at the photo books that you have? On the other hand, it's also very nice if in 30 years you can still pick up a photo book from now or from 10 years ago and have all these memories there presented. I mean, you're never going to go on a hard drive, or never, but it's not, the chances are much smaller to do that than with a photo book that is just physically is somewhere. So I think the physicality of a photograph that is printed gives a different meaning and different possibility for the photograph to function, just because it's now become part of physical world, and it can have a different life. And for me personally, it has only grown in value, just because, like I said, I do a magazine, a Matcha Rock, I say 4 times per year, not every 3 months, because I'm not very strict with my own deadlines. I mean, quality first and then deadline second. That's a bit how I think about it. But it's pretty much so. It's 4 times per year. So I put some pressure on myself to make sure that I have enough good photographs that are within a certain theme, certain research, to make them into a magazine. And for me, that is a very important way of taking. It functions as a filter in a way. Like, I look at what I've got, and then I make a selection And you can do that on your computer as well. You could also do it and say, okay, I have a website, and every 3 months I put 24 photographs in a new folder, and present them as a series on my website. That's also a way to publish. So it's, in a sense, so that's about publishing. So it's not necessarily about printing. But for me, the printing part is very important because it can be appreciated in a different way. So a photographic magazine, the way I do them, or if you make a photo book, it has a different value than a photograph on a screen. How often are you going to go back to a website or someone's Instagram feed to look at it again and again and again? But when you have a book or a magazine, you will take it again. Maybe not every day, but maybe in a year or two, you take it out of the cupboard again and you just start going through it. So it works different there. And also in exhibition-wise, it's similar. I mean, you could easily have just screens hanging on the wall and just have photographs on a screen. Yeah. But it's not tactile in the same way as when you have a printed photograph. So there's just a different way of presenting it. So I definitely think that people have started to appreciate printing differently just because it is so much easier to use a screen to share your photographs. But I don't think it has become less valuable to print. It's actually, well, technically it's become more expensive maybe. I'm not sure because it's been done less. But that's a whole different discussion, of course. That's not really the kind of value I'm talking about. But yeah, for me, printed is a different way of sharing. And it also, you reach a different audience when you have printed matter. I mean, you can, with Instagram or with a website, you have to point people towards that, or you have to have different ways to get people to become part of your audience. We have printed works. I can share them in a different way. What I did before, I think it was before I did my first magazine, I made a little thing called addendum. So it's like, technically that's the term for something that is added to printed work after they did it with the encyclopedia, for example. When new information came to light just after printing, they would put an addendum in the encyclopedia and would define it in a better way, or it would add information. So I thought, okay, if I make a small magazine, so it was A6 sized. I still do them, actually. I have a second one now, and I think the third one will be released somewhere next year. I made a small printed magazine kind of thing, and I called it addendum. I didn't put my name on it very large. I mean, my name was there, but it was more like it had to look like it was something that was made by someone else, someone who was publishing this thing about my work. And I would add them to books in bookstores that I thought would be of similar kind of audience, would be interested in my work and the books that I would put my own works into. So it's like kind of a parasitic way of working with other artists' books, and that's just because that way I could reach a new audience without using internet or other means of digital communication. And of course, in reality, it didn't work as well as I thought it up, because often books are shrink wrapped in the store, so it's really hard to put these things in. But of course, you can also use these in a different way. So I often, when I'm on the streets, when I'm taking photographs, I always have a few with me when people are asking what I'm doing, because there's good reason to ask what I'm doing sometimes. It's a really practical way to quickly show someone what I'm actually doing. It's like all of a sudden it's legitimate that I'm doing these things on the street instead of being a weirdo with a camera just doing strange things. So that's a good thing about it. And it's just, when I have an exhibition, I have a few lying there, or when someone orders a magazine, I always send one with it. And what I sometimes do now is just, because often in exhibition spaces or museums or galleries, you have a table full of flyers and little booklets of things that are happening in the same area. I'll just drop like 10, like a stack of 10 of them or something, just in hopes that someone will find it. And it's not even, I mean, it's always nice if someone then contacts me or whatever, but it's not really the goal. It's just also nice that you share what you do. And yeah, every now and then someone might be touched or inspired, not just with my stuff, but with just anything that you might bump into. It's just nice if you can, if you can touch someone else's life just a little bit for a brief moment. It's always nice. So I'm just trying to do a small kind of butterfly effect thing with these, I think. And it's that's probably one of the first things I did with my printed photographs.
What do you mentioned exhibiting your work. What is it that you most enjoy about doing that? What is it that it does for you that you enjoy so much?
Yeah, there's also at different levels. There's ways to and things to like about it. One thing I really like about it is the whole preparation. Just to think about what are you going to show, how are you going to show it, what kind of space is it, what's hanging next to each other, and what size, what kind of materials. Even though the materials I'm pretty straightforward about now, I just have one way of printing. But these things, so that's one thing that I really like about it. And then also to think about what are these photographs altogether, what is that communicating? There's not really a story that I'm telling because it's all non-figurative work, but there is of course something that it evokes. If you have very dark photographs, and of course it's at least at first glance it will probably give a quite somber kind of not very happy kind of atmosphere. And if you have very brightly colored photographs altogether, that will give a very friendly atmosphere. Even though it may not be, if you start to take an actual look, it may be completely the opposite, of course. But to think about those things, that's something I really enjoy. I think about quite a lot, even though at the moment, I have an exhibition planned by the end of the year in Austria. But I'm not sure how that's going to work out because everything is different now with the amount of people that can visit and everything. Yeah. But I really like about thinking about how I can present everything together. So that's on one level that I like a lot about it. But then when the actual exhibition is there, and that's also on the level where I usually exhibit. So the galleries and art spaces that I work with, I think 85 to 90% of the visitors comes when the opening is happening. And what I always really like it when the opening, or maybe an opening weekend, or like a few times when you're there as the artist, when you have the possibility to just have a chat with whoever is coming to see your work. And sometimes there are people that have been looking at art their whole life and they know exactly what they're looking at without having ever seen your work or your name before. And sometimes it's people who, are maybe young people still thinking about maybe doing something with arts, and they can have a conversation about that. So it's a starting point for a conversation about maybe art, maybe life, maybe something completely different that you figure out while you're talking that you're also interested in, both of you. And so just the human interaction, I really like that about exhibiting it. So it's also, that's a way of publishing it and having a very direct possibility to have a conversation with the people that see your work. With my magazine, it's not like that. I send it out. Of course, sometimes I get emails back from people who've purchased a magazine, and they just I just had a very nice message from someone on Instagram who'd been. So when this whole Corona crisis started, I started using a hashtag on Instagram, "Seen from Home." And a lot of people also started doing that, which was really nice to see. People started to just look at where they were, where they are staying for that period of time in a different way and trying to photograph it. And that became a thing for a lot of people to take photographs of their daily surroundings, which was usually their house, and surprise themselves also by finding new things. And I've really seen interesting things happening there where people really developed a new style or found a new interesting subject that they kept photographing. If you look back in their feed, what they did before and what they started to do after that was really nice. And so the latest edition of my magazine, I focused on this period with the photographs that I took at the house. And so and then I sent those out to people who ordered one, and I got a really nice message from someone who was so happy that this whole thing happened, and how she dealt with the whole situation while also graduating and having to take care of her kids and all these kinds of things. So it becomes much more than just art. It becomes more about meeting people and exchanging views on how life is and how the world is and can be. And if that's something you can do by exhibiting your work, so in that sense, exhibiting can also be one of the magazines that I do is a kind of exhibition in a way. It's just not in the same space. Everybody has a different space where they view it, but it's still I approach it with a similar mindset, where I look at how do these photographs work when I have them in this order, because you sequence them, of course, and that's also what you do in a space. Even though people can, that's the same with a book. You can also just go through it in a different way than not from the front to the back, but differently. And you do the same in a space. You can walk around it differently, but you have an intention, and you do all you can to make sure that people get something of that intention as well, and experience it in the way that you try to get them to experience it.
You've mentioned about the kind of restrictions with movement a few times. When you are allowed to travel, when we are all allowed to actually leave our homes again, when you're in a new place, how important is it for you as a photographer to experience the place as much as it is to just photograph it?
Yeah, I think that's also experiencing on different levels. On one hand, I'm experiencing it from a photographer's point of view, as an artist looking for compositions and all the elements that I need to get to the photographs that I'm taking. But I'm also trying to experience it just from a human point of view. So I'm meeting people, and which has nothing to do with my photographs at that point. It's just, there's other people traveling as well. So especially with a camper van, you can pretty much stay anywhere. And then, of course, other people find this similar spots. So you meet, and then you have interesting interaction with other people, or you come to a place and people live in there, and you have it's always about conversations, I think, and seeing how people are dealing with traditions and how their culture is shaped. And I really like that. So that's also what I take a lot of time for. So although I really think one of the main reasons that I travel so much is to do my photography, that is also part of it, the meeting people and getting to know a place in that sense. So it's not only on a photographic level that I try to get to know the space, right, the place, the location, but it's really, I try to make it more like everything. And of course, it is pretty much like that. My whole life is where I am at that moment. There's still stuff happening back in the Netherlands when I'm in Spain, and it might be on my mind, but I try to strip away most of those things so I can be there just as open as possible. And just trying to be open, I think that's a very important part of how I want to be as an artist. So also as how I look towards which medium I use, or even what my subject is, but also in life, just to remain open. Even though I may not always be as open as I would like to be, I try to open myself up so I can experience as much as possible before this whole thing's over, and this is it. Yeah. So I'm quite aware of the fact that this is it. That's how I see how life is. It's just, this is it, and I try to take out of it as much as possible without hurting anyone, and just making the best of it, and building memories. And well, luckily, together with my wife, she's really happy to do this together, and I'm really happy that she's doing this together with me. So we're really doing this together. So we have this common experience. Even though when I'm taking my photographs, I'm often out by myself, but we're really doing it together, and it's hopefully we get all together, so we have all these memories to share again. And otherwise, I have a lot of memories that I can still dive into when I'm older. Yeah.
I'm in the same position. I've got a wife that's incredibly supportive, and she travels with me when I do photographing abroad and stuff. So it's such an amazing feeling. You've mentioned your magazine a few times. I want to make sure that people know what it is and where they can find it. So if you could just elaborate on your magazine a little bit.
Yeah, so I started doing that. I'm in my 5th year now, so edition 20 is coming out by the end of the year. I started doing this magazine 5.5 years ago. It's a A5 sized full color magazine, which is called Maarten Rock. And every 3 months ish, I have a new edition with. It's not always a very specific theme, but I hope always it shows a new direction that I'm trying to that I am exploring as a photographer, as an artist, and it's really become a very important driver behind how I work. It forces me to always look back at, okay, what am I doing? Where is this going? Is this good enough? Is this already a clear, coherent whole, or is it still going in all kinds of directions? And I sell them on my website. So they're at the moment of recording, they are €12, including shipping. So it's quite affordable, I would say. And you can get them on my website, maartenrots.nl, or maartenrock.com also gets you there. It's just a shortcut. And it's just something that I've really enjoyed doing for the past 5 years. It's really an important thing that's always on the background, even though it takes in a very important place. So it's not always on the background, but it's always there. It's always something that is on my mind when I'm looking at what I've been doing. Hey, could this already be a subject for a new Maarten Rock, or is it? Does it need some more time? Does it have to marinate a little bit longer before I can push it out there? And yeah.
And obviously, Instagram has become the center of the universe for everybody, it seems. Where's the best place people can find your work specifically? Where would you like them to initially find your work? Would it be your Instagram, or would it be your website?
Ooh, that's a good one. I've been thinking about it a little bit, actually, because what I do with my website, I really only upload a series maybe twice a year. Because but on Instagram, it's much more open. You put out one single image, and of course they can be part of a series, and you can put them all out, and even in one post maybe. But so if you want to see what I'm up to lately, then Instagram will work more easily, because it's just I post something a few times a week, and most of the time it's new stuff. And my website just takes a little bit longer sometimes, although that's where I publish my magazine. So that's I think both are equally important by now, which is weird, because the nice thing about having a website is that you're in full control. Nothing will change unless I change it, or if I stop paying for my website, it will just disappear. But Instagram, they can just change stuff to their algorithm or to what they allow, and then all of a sudden it might be gone or whatever. So that's a bit a weird thing about Instagram. I really like the possibilities it's given us, or pretty much anyone. But so on a very practical level, I would say my website is the best place to go, just because I will always make sure that it has to show what I want you to see. But Instagram is nice if you want something in your Instagram feed, because like you say, it's become the center of the universe for pretty much anyone. Yeah. If you want to see something pop up of what I do every now and then definitely Instagram is the best way to connect. Yeah.
And what's your Instagram, your name on Instagram?
So that's at Maarten Rots. So it's MAARTENROTS.
Amazing. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I didn't actually expect that you would, because when someone's extremely artistic like yourself, I'm always nervous that maybe I'm a little bit beneath the possibility of approaching. You've been wonderful to talk to and so insightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kris. This was a big pleasure, and I'm really happy about it. So no, don't. I think anyone should be approachable, and I always love it when it's, especially when it is open and when you can reach. Like well, maybe now you're probably gonna have to cut this off your recording. But I really like it when something is open to a large audience, when it's not niche. Even though it may seem niche, what I do, if you see it at first sight, because it is quite specific, I'm still just anyone, and I like it when it remains open, when people can just approach you. And if I can clarify a little bit what I do, and people get a better idea about what I do and why I do it and what it is they're seeing, then all the better. I like that.
Well, I think it's one of the real ironies of the world that we're living in, with the fact that so many people want to be known and so many people want to be famous or infamous in some way, but also they want to be completely unapproachable. And it seems to just completely contradict common sense. But there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we all go to the toilet every day a couple of times, and we all smell, right? We're just humans. I think it's nice, and we could just keep that as that's the starting level where we all are, and if we do it from there, it's better than to just be sitting on a high throne and you're not worthy of knowing about how I do what I do. No, it's just let's just be open and friendly. It's the best way to deal with each other, I think.
Perfect message. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kris.